My daughter-in-law looked me in the eye at my grandson's birthday party and said, "Stop interfering in our lives. We don't need your help anymore." I didn't argue. I quietly stepped outside, dialed my lawyer, and whispered 4 words: "Freeze the trust fund." 2 weeks later, when she tried to withdraw money for their new house, the bank told her the account was locked. Her face, when she realized who controlled it, was priceless. My name is Sylvia Morrison. I'm 65 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes protecting the people you love means protecting them from their own parents. Let me introduce you to everyone in this story. First, there's my son Derek. He's 42, works as a civil engineer, and for most of his life he was a good man with a strong backbone. Then he married Amber 7 years ago. She's 38, used to work in marketing, but quit to stay home with the kids. And honestly, she's one of the most manipulative people I've ever encountered. Derek and Amber have 2 children, my grandchildren. Lucas is 6 years old, bright and sweet, and Sophie is 3, still too young to understand the mess the adults in her family have created. Then there's my daughter Rachel. She's 45, a pediatric surgeon, married with a son named Owen, who's 9. Rachel has been my rock through all of this. And finally, there's Thomas Brennan, my financial advisor and lawyer. He's 58, and he's been managing my money for 20 years. Now, if you want to know how a birthday party turned into a family war over money and control, you need to stick around for this. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this story is going to take some turns you won't see coming. 4 years ago, I lost my husband, Martin, to pancreatic cancer. We'd been married for 43 years. Martin was a software engineer, and I spent my career climbing the corporate ladder until I became CFO of a tech company. We both worked hard, invested smart, and by the time I retired at 60, we'd built real wealth. I'm talking several $1,000,000 in investments, retirement accounts, and real estate. When Martin died, he left everything to me with complete trust that I'd handle it wisely. I've always been careful about money and family. I've seen too many situations where wealthy parents just hand their kids cash whenever they ask, and it ruins them. It teaches them nothing about responsibility or earning their own way. So when my grandchildren were born, I did something different. I set up trust funds for each of them. Lucas, Sophie, and Owen each have $250,000 in protected accounts designed to grow until they turn 25. At that point, they can use the money for education, buying a home, starting a business, whatever they need to launch their adult lives. But here's the key part. I made myself the trustee with full control. I can release money early for legitimate needs like medical emergencies or college tuition, but nobody can just withdraw cash without my approval. When Derek married Amber 7 years ago, they were struggling financially. Amber wanted this huge, expensive wedding they couldn't actually afford. I offered to contribute $30,000 as a gift. I thought it was generous, and I expected them to plan within that budget. Instead, Amber saw the money as permission to spend even more. She added upgrades, extra guests, expensive decorations, everything. It should have been my first warning sign, but I brushed it off as wedding excitement. After Lucas was born, Derek and Amber both worked full-time but struggled with childcare costs. Quality daycare in their area cost about $2,000 a month. I paid for it for 2 full years. That's nearly $45,000 right there. I didn't ask for repayment. I did it because they were family and because I could afford to help. Then when Sophie was born, Amber decided she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Their household income dropped significantly. I helped again. I covered medical bills that insurance didn't pay. I bought groceries when money was tight. I paid for family vacations so Lucas and Sophie could have good memories with their parents. Over 7 years, I gave Derek and Amber over $120,000 in various forms of help. Not loans, gifts. I never expected repayment. I never kept a running tab to throw in their faces later. I did it because I loved them and because I wanted my grandchildren to grow up without financial stress hanging over their household. But I never, not once, gave them access to the trust funds I'd set up for the kids. Those were protected and separate for a reason. About 2 years ago, things started changing. Amber's attitude toward me shifted dramatically. She started making comments about my parenting advice being old-fashioned. She'd roll her eyes when I suggested things or offered help. She began limiting when I could see Lucas and Sophie, requiring days of advance notice like I was a stranger instead of their grandmother. Phone calls with Derek became shorter and less frequent. He started canceling family dinners with vague excuses. I could see my son slipping away, becoming more stressed and tired every time I saw him. Rachel noticed it too. One evening over coffee, she said what I'd been thinking but didn't want to admit. "Mom, Amber is isolating Derek from us. She's controlling everything in his life, when he can visit, what he can say, how he spends his time and his money. This isn't healthy." I wanted to believe Rachel was overreacting, but deep down, I knew she was right. The signs were everywhere. Amber had started posting constantly on social media about their perfect life, their beautiful home, their amazing family. But behind the scenes, she was building walls between Derek and everyone who'd loved him before she came along. Then came the demands. Amber started making comments about how I spoiled Lucas and Sophie with gifts. She created rules about when I was allowed to visit, treating me like I needed permission to see my own grandchildren. Once, I showed up with surprise presents for Lucas's birthday, and Amber wouldn't even let me in the house. She stood in the doorway and told me they were having family time, even though I could see through the window they were just watching television. I left feeling hurt and confused, wondering what I'd done wrong. The worst part was watching Derek let it happen. He never stood up for me. He never told Amber she was being unreasonable. He just went along with whatever she wanted, becoming a shadow of the strong, independent man I'd raised. I kept hoping things would get better, that Amber would soften once she felt more secure in the family, but things only got worse. And it all came crashing down at Lucas's 6th birthday party, when Amber finally showed her true colors, and I had to make a decision that would change our family forever. Lucas's 6th birthday party was on a sunny Saturday in September. Amber had made it very clear that I was only invited for the cake portion, not the whole celebration. I was supposed to arrive at exactly 3 p.m., not earlier. I showed up right on time with Rachel and Owen, carrying a carefully wrapped present. It was a Lego robotics kit that Lucas had been talking about for months. When Amber opened the door, she gave me one of those tight, fake smiles that never reached her eyes. "Right on time, Sylvia," she said. Like being punctual was barely acceptable. The house was packed with children running everywhere, but I immediately noticed something strange. None of Derek's side of the family was there except me and Rachel. His brother James, who lived just 2 hours away and was close with Lucas, wasn't there. My sister Betty, who Lucas loved and called Aunt Betty, was nowhere to be seen. The entire party was filled with Amber's family, her friends, and some of Lucas's classmates. Derek stood in the corner of the kitchen looking exhausted and uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be at his own son's party. I tried to walk over to Derek, but Amber intercepted me immediately. "Derek's busy coordinating party activities," she said firmly, physically steering me toward the living room where the kids were playing. I felt like a stranger being managed rather than family being welcomed. Lucas saw me and ran over with the biggest smile. "Grandma Sylvia, you came." He hugged me tight, and my heart just melted. When he opened my present and saw the robotics kit, his whole face lit up. "Mom, look! It's the robot building set. This is exactly what I wanted." Amber walked over with that fake smile again. "That's very generous, Sylvia. Though we did talk about keeping gifts more practical this year. Lucas already has so many toys he doesn't play with." The comment was designed to make me feel like I'd done something wrong, like I didn't know my own grandson well enough to pick an appropriate gift. I spent the next 20 minutes playing with Lucas and the other children, genuinely enjoying watching them laugh and run around. Then it was time for cake. Everyone gathered in the dining room singing happy birthday, while Lucas blew out his candles with pure joy on his face. I stood next to Derek trying to catch his eye, hoping for some connection, but he seemed hollow and distant, like he wasn't really present. After everyone had been served cake, Amber pulled me aside into the hallway, away from the guests. The friendly mask she'd been wearing for everyone else dropped instantly, and what I saw underneath was cold anger. "We need to talk about boundaries, Sylvia," she said, her voice low but sharp as a knife. "You've been overstepping for a long time now, and frankly, Derek and I are done with it." I was completely caught off guard. "What are you talking about? I barely see the kids anymore. I came today exactly when you told me to." Amber crossed her arms over her chest, her expression hard. "This isn't just about today. It's about your constant presence in our lives. You're always offering money, always trying to help with things we don't need help with, always giving your opinions about how we should parent our children. It's suffocating, and we want it to stop." I felt my chest get tight. "Amber, I've only ever tried to support you both. Isn't that what family does for each other?" Her eyes narrowed. "Support? Or control? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you use your money to maintain power over our family decisions." "Well, I have news for you. We don't need your help anymore. Derek got a big promotion at work. We're doing fine financially now. So here's what needs to happen going forward. Stop interfering in our lives. Stop showing up with expensive gifts trying to buy the kids' affection. Stop offering to pay for things every time something comes up. We're adults, Sylvia. We can handle our own family without you hovering over everything we do." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Amber wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but filled with venom. "And another thing, those trust funds you set up for Lucas and Sophie? We've decided we want control of them. They're our children, not yours. We should be the ones making decisions about how that money gets managed and spent. Derek is going to contact your lawyer next week to have the trustee changed from you to us. It's time you accepted that you're not in charge of this family anymore." I felt like I'd been physically slapped. "Amber, those trust funds are specifically designed to protect the children's futures. That's exactly why I'm the trustee, to make sure the money is there when Lucas and Sophie actually need it as adults." Amber's face hardened even more. "I don't care what your reasoning was when you set them up. Those are our kids, and that's money that belongs in our family. You've done enough damage trying to control everything with your checkbook. From now on, you see Lucas and Sophie when we allow it, on our terms, following our rules. And if you don't like those conditions, then you don't have to see them at all. Trust me, we'll be perfectly fine without your interference." She turned and walked back to the party like nothing had happened, leaving me standing alone in that hallway, shaking with shock and hurt. I found Rachel in the living room, talking to one of the other parents. I walked up to her and said quietly, "We need to leave, right now." Rachel took one look at my face and knew something serious had happened. She immediately gathered Owen without asking questions. We said goodbye to Lucas, who looked so sad to see us go early, and that broke my heart even more. We left without speaking to Derek or Amber again. I couldn't even look at my son. In the car, I stayed silent for the first 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Rachel finally asked, "Mom, what did she say to you?" I couldn't answer yet. Instead, I pulled into a shopping center parking lot, put the car in park, and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Thomas Brennan's number. Thomas had been my financial advisor and lawyer for over 20 years. He'd helped me and Martin build our wealth, and he'd personally structured the trust funds for my grandchildren with careful legal protections. I hit dial, and he answered on the third ring. "Sylvia, how are you? Is everything all right?" His voice was warm and familiar. I took a deep breath. "Thomas, I need you to freeze both trust funds immediately. Lucas's and Sophie's accounts. No withdrawals, no transfers, no changes to the trustee designation without my direct written approval and physical signature in person at your office." There was a pause on the other end. Thomas had worked with me long enough to know I didn't make rash decisions about money. "Consider it done. I'll file the paperwork first thing Monday morning. Those accounts will be completely locked. No one will be able to access them or make any changes without you present in my office." Can I ask what prompted this? I explained briefly what Amber had said about demanding control of the trusts and threatening to cut off my access to my grandchildren if I didn't comply. Thomas let out a long breath. "Sylvia, I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but you're doing exactly the right thing. Those trusts exist specifically to prevent this kind of situation. I'll make sure they're protected." I thanked him and ended the call. Rachel was staring at me with a mixture of concern and something that looked like admiration. "Mom, what exactly did Amber say to you back there?" I told her everything about being called controlling and interfering, about the demand to hand over the trust funds, about the threat that I'd never see Lucas and Sophie again unless I followed Amber's rules. Rachel's face turned red with fury. "She can't do that. Those funds are legally yours to manage. She has no right to demand anything." I started driving again, my hands now steady on the wheel. "She just tried, Rachel. But she's about to learn a very expensive lesson about who actually has the power in this situation." The rest of the weekend was one of the longest of my life. I replayed Amber's words over and over, each time feeling the sting of being told I was interfering in my own son's life after giving them over $120,000 in help over 7 years. I thought about all the times I'd supported them financially, emotionally, practically, and this was my reward. Demands, ultimatums, and threats to weaponize my grandchildren against me. On Monday morning, I drove to Thomas's office downtown. He had all the paperwork ready when I arrived. "Both trusts are now frozen solid," he confirmed, sliding documents across his desk for me to review. "I've notified the bank that holds the accounts. There will be no withdrawals, no modifications to beneficiaries, no changes to trustee status. Nothing moves without your signature, in person, in my presence. I've also added an additional security measure. If anyone attempts to access these accounts or legally challenge the trust structure, I'm to be notified immediately and will respond accordingly." I signed where he indicated and felt a small sense of relief. "Thank you, Thomas. I never imagined I'd need to protect these accounts from my own son's family." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression sympathetic but knowing. "Sylvia, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times. Adult children or their spouses start viewing trust funds as their money instead of protected assets for the actual beneficiaries. You were smart to make yourself trustee with full discretionary control. Those funds are meant to give Lucas and Sophie opportunities when they're 25, not to fund their parents' lifestyle upgrades now." He paused, then added, "I assume Derek and Amber don't know yet that the accounts are frozen?" I shook my head. "Not yet, But Amber said Derek would be calling you this week to demand the trustee be changed. That's going to be an interesting conversation. Thomas smiled slightly. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. The answer will be a very clear, very professional no. The trust documents are ironclad. They have absolutely no legal standing to demand changes. And I'll make that perfectly clear. Over the next week, I waited. Derek didn't call me even once. Not to apologize for his wife's behavior. Not to check if I was okay. Not even to explain or make excuses. It was like I didn't exist to him anymore. And that hurt worse than anything Amber had said. But I held firm. I'd drawn my line. And I wasn't backing down. 10 days after Lucas's birthday party, my phone finally rang. It was Derek, and his voice sounded strained and tired. Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over tonight? I agreed, though my stomach was in knots. That evening, Derek showed up at my door alone, and he looked terrible. His face was drawn. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he seemed to have aged 5 years in just over a week. We sat in my living room in heavy silence for what felt like forever. Finally, Derek spoke. Mom, Amber told me what she said to you at the party. I want you to know I didn't agree with how she handled it. I waited, hoping desperately that he'd actually defend me, that he'd say she was wrong. But instead, he continued. But she does have a point about the trust funds. We're Lucas and Sophie's parents. It makes sense that we should have control over accounts that are meant for our children. It doesn't make sense for you to be the only one making decisions about their money. I took a slow, deep breath before responding. Derek, those trusts were set up specifically to protect Lucas and Sophie's futures. The money is meant to be there when they turn 25, when they're mature enough to make wise decisions about education, housing, or starting careers. If I transfer control to you and Amber right now, what's to stop that money from being used for other purposes? A new car? A bigger house? A vacation you can't quite afford? Derek's face flushed red with anger. Are you seriously suggesting we'd steal from our own children? That's incredibly insulting, Mom. We'd never do that. I kept my voice calm and level. I'm not saying you'd steal, Derek. I'm saying that money has a way of disappearing when there aren't proper protections in place. I've seen it happen countless times in my career. Parents borrow from their children's accounts with every intention of paying it back, telling themselves it's just temporary, and somehow the money never gets replaced. These trusts exist specifically to prevent that from happening. Derek stood up, clearly frustrated. So basically, you don't trust us. You don't trust your own son to do the right thing. That's what this is really about, isn't it? I stood too, meeting his eyes directly. Derek, 3 days after Amber told me you were going to take control of those accounts, you called Thomas trying to change the trustee designation. That tells me everything I need to know. Derek's face went completely pale. He hadn't realized I knew about that phone call. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then grabbed his coat. I have to go, he muttered, and walked out without another word. I stood at the door watching him leave, feeling my heart break all over again. 2 days later, I received a text message from an unknown number. We know you locked the accounts. That money belongs to our children. Unfreeze them immediately or you will never see Lucas or Sophie again. This is your last warning. It was Amber, texting from a number I didn't have saved. I didn't respond to her. Instead, I forwarded the message to Thomas and to my personal lawyer, creating documentation of her threats. Then I blocked the number. I was done engaging with her manipulation tactics. If she wanted to fight, I was fully prepared. 2 weeks later, Rachel called me early one morning, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Mom, you need to hear something. I ran into Derek's brother James at the grocery store yesterday. He told me what's really been going on, and it explains absolutely everything. I sat down at my kitchen table, bracing myself. Rachel continued, Derek and Amber have been trying to buy a new house. Not just any house, Mom. A huge, expensive house in one of those exclusive gated neighborhoods. They were pre-approved for a mortgage, but they needed a massive down payment. They've been planning for months to withdraw money from Lucas and Sophie's trust funds to cover it. That's what this whole thing has been about. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. They were planning to use the children's future to buy themselves a house? Rachel's voice was furious. That's exactly what they were going to do. James said Amber's been obsessed with it, talking constantly about how they finally had access to money that would let them upgrade their lifestyle. They weren't going to ask your permission or even tell you. They were just going to change the trustee, pull out the cash, and present it as a done deal after the fact. When they realized you'd frozen everything, they panicked. That's why Amber confronted you at the party. That's why Derek tried to guilt you into unfreezing the accounts. It was never about parental rights or trust. It was about getting their hands on $500,000. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. The hostility, the demands, the threats. It had never been about boundaries or my interference. It had been about money the entire time. They'd seen those trust funds as their ticket to a bigger house and a better lifestyle, and I'd stood in their way. Over the next few days, I worked with my lawyers to gather documentation. Thomas provided a complete timeline of every attempt Derek and Amber had made to access the funds. They'd called multiple times. Amber had even shown up at the bank claiming she had power of attorney, which was completely false. When the bank refused her, she'd apparently become hostile and argumentative with the manager. 3 weeks after I'd frozen the accounts, Derek called again, asking to meet. This time, both he and Amber came to my house together. Amber's face was tight, with barely restrained anger, but she was clearly trying to appear reasonable and calm. Sylvia, we need to resolve this like adults, she began, her voice controlled but strained. We have a time-sensitive real estate opportunity. We need to access the trust funds temporarily. We'll pay everything back with interest, I promise. I looked directly at her, my voice steady. Those funds are not available. They're protected trusts for Lucas and Sophie's futures, and they will remain completely untouched until the children reach 25 years old, exactly as I designed them. Amber's careful composure shattered instantly. This is absolutely ridiculous. We're their parents. We have every right to decide what's best for our family. Besides, a bigger house in a better neighborhood benefits the kids too. Better schools, safer streets, more space to grow. You're being selfish and controlling. I shook my head slowly. A bigger house benefits you and Derek. The trust funds benefit Lucas and Sophie when they're adults launching their own lives. There's a very significant difference, and you know it. Derek finally spoke up, his voice defeated and desperate. Mom, please, we really need this money. The house we found is perfect. It's in an amazing school district. It's an investment in the kids' education and future. I turned to look at my son, and I let all my disappointment show on my face. Derek, over the past 7 years, I have given you and Amber over $120,000. I paid for your wedding. I covered childcare costs for 2 full years. I helped with medical bills, groceries, and family vacations. I never once asked for a penny back. I gave freely because I love you, and I love my grandchildren. And now you want to take money that's specifically set aside for Lucas and Sophie's adult futures to buy yourselves a bigger house? The room went silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Amber's face turned bright red, and I could see her hands shaking with rage. We didn't ask for all that help. You offered it. That's completely different from the trust funds. You can't hold your so-called generosity over our heads now. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd prepared with my lawyer. You're absolutely right, Amber. I offered all that help freely, and I'm not asking for repayment. But the trust funds are different. They have one single purpose, which is securing my grandchildren's futures when they're adults. I will not compromise that purpose for any reason, regardless of what you want right now. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us. I've had my lawyers document every financial contribution I've made to your household over the past 7 years. This folder also includes the threatening text message you sent me, Amber, and complete documentation of your multiple attempts to fraudulently access the children's trust accounts. I looked at both of them. I'm not asking for repayment of anything I've given you in the past. That money was given with love, but moving forward, there will be zero financial assistance of any kind. The trust funds remain frozen and under my sole control as trustee, and my relationship with Lucas and Sophie will continue on reasonable terms, or we can have this conversation through family court with a judge. Amber shot to her feet, shaking with fury. You can't threaten us with court. We're their parents. You have no rights. I met her gaze without flinching. You threatened to keep my grandchildren from me unless I gave you money. That's called parental alienation and financial coercion. I have documentation of everything. Take me to court if you want. I promise you won't like how it ends. I turned to Derek one final time. I love you, son. I always will. But I will not be manipulated or bullied into funding your lifestyle at your children's expense. When you're ready to rebuild our relationship without Amber's influence poisoning everything, I'll be here waiting. But this conversation about money is permanently over. They left without another word, Amber slamming the door behind them hard enough to rattle the windows. The weeks that followed were hard, but clarifying. Derek stopped calling completely. Amber posted vague messages on social media about toxic family members and protecting your children from negative people. But something interesting happened. Several of Derek's friends and relatives started reaching out to me privately, expressing support and sharing their own concerns about Amber's controlling behavior. I wasn't alone in seeing the problem. About 2 months after that final confrontation, Derek's brother James called to tell me that Derek and Amber had lost the house they wanted because they couldn't come up with the down payment. The financial pressure was causing massive fights between them, and Amber was blaming Derek for not controlling his mother better. 3 months after Lucas's birthday party, Derek showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening, alone. He looked different somehow, lighter despite the obvious stress on his face. Mom, can we talk? I let him in, and we sat in the same living room where we'd had our confrontation. This time, Derek's whole energy was different. He wasn't defensive or angry. He looked broken open, but in a healing way. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. You were right about the trust fund. You were right about Amber. You were right about all of it. His voice cracked with emotion. When we couldn't get that house, Amber completely fell apart. She blamed me for everything, said I was weak for not standing up to you, that I'd ruined our chance at happiness. And for the first time in years, I actually heard what she was saying. It wasn't about the kids or their futures. It was about her wanting a showcase house for her social media. It was about status and appearances. And I'd been so desperate to keep her happy that I couldn't see what she was doing to me. To us, to our whole family. Derek told me everything over the next hour. How Amber had been pressuring him for years to ask me for more money. How she'd systematically isolated him from his family and friends. How she'd convinced him that I was the problem, when really she was the one manipulating everything. He was exhausted and ashamed, but finally ready to make real changes. I asked Amber to go to marriage counseling with me. She refused, said there was nothing wrong with her and that I was the problem. So I've made a decision, Mom. I'm filing for separation. I'm going to fight for joint custody of Lucas and Sophie, and I'm going to rebuild my relationship with my family, starting with you, if you'll let me. Tears filled my eyes as I reached across and took my son's hand. I never stopped loving you, Derek. I was just waiting for you to find your way back. The divorce took 8 months and was brutal. Amber fought hard, demanding excessive spousal support and majority custody. She tried to paint me as a toxic influence on the children. But in court, the truth came out. Derek's lawyer presented all the documentation of Amber's attempts to manipulate the trust funds, her threatening messages, and her pattern of isolating Derek from his support system. The judge granted Derek 50-50 custody and rejected most of Amber's financial demands, noting she was perfectly capable of returning to work. A year after that birthday party, life looked completely different. Derek had his own apartment where Lucas and Sophie spent half their time. The kids were adjusting well with help from a good therapist. I saw them regularly now, naturally, without conditions or manipulation. The trust funds remained exactly as I'd designed them, locked and protected until Lucas and Sophie turned 25. Here's what I want you to understand from my story, because yes, I'm Sylvia, and every word of this is true. Money reveals people's true character like nothing else can. When I established those trust funds, I wasn't just giving my grandchildren money. I was giving them protection from adults who might make selfish decisions with their futures. Freezing those accounts wasn't about control. It was about protection. Amber literally told me they were taking control to use the money for a house, not for the children's education or futures, but for their own lifestyle upgrade. I saw through the justifications to the truth, and I refused to enable it, even when it cost me my relationship with my son temporarily. The hardest part wasn't the conflict with Amber. It was watching Derek be manipulated and controlled, watching him pull away from everyone who loved him. But I held firm, and eventually it helped him see the truth. Those trust funds will stay protected until Lucas turns 25 in 19 years and Sophie in 22 years. By then, they'll be adults who can make their own wise choices. That was always the point. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment about a time you had to make a hard choice to protect someone you love. My mother taught me that love sometimes means saying no, especially when saying yes would be easier. I'm 65 years old, still managing my investments, still active in my grandchildren's lives, and I've never regretted protecting those accounts for a single moment. Remember, setting boundaries isn't controlling. It's loving people enough to protect them from their own worst impulses, even when they can't see it yet.